Building a fiberglass body from scratch is a long and drawn-out process with many steps. And it's going to take me several episodes to explain it all. So here's a summary diagram that puts it all together on one sheet. In my last episode, I described how you apply the plywood armature onto the car's steel chassis as a base to attach the foam. In this episode, we're going to go on to the next step, step 3 on this chart, about how you actually attach the foam and shape it. So how do you transfer a 1/6 scale model to the real thing? Well, you start off taking very detailed photos. First, from the side, directly on, and you take it from a long ways away. I took mine from about 15 feet away, and that's because the closer you get, the more you get a fisheye effect. So by going back as far as you can, the lines get much more parallel, and you get a more accurate photo for measurements. I also took one from the top, again from a long ways away. I happen to have a 2-story living room with a railing over the top floor, so I actually set it on the ground floor and took the picture from the second floor to ensure I got a long ways away. Again, so those lines start lining up parallel. And then again, one from the front, same thing, about 15 feet away. And another one from the rear, about 15 feet away. I then took those photos and processed them to make sure I could see the lines. And the top photo, I then laid against a grid. As you can see here, I've printed out the grid. And it has the 50 millimeter markings on it, just like on my table. They're all marked out in 50 millimeter grid square. And then I made sure it was the right scale by basically taking my wheelbase, laying it out on the grid to ensure that, I had the grid on my model correct as well. Then I took that and I drew it on my table, as you can see by these lines. Now, as you remember, I had a version 1 body and a version 2 body. And so here we go. The purple line is the original version 1. Version 2 is where we're at now. So I laid out that line. Just take you around here. You can see all the way around. You can see where the tail section comes up. Again, on the other side, following the green line. And up front here, you can see there's actually, this version 2 is slightly longer, about 50 millimeters longer. So that's the top view. And then as you look at my bodywork that I put on so far, you can see that this wooden armature I built is all within the line. And that helps me know approximately how much foam I'm going to have to apply to the armature to bring it out to the line. So that gives me all my horizontal lines. I did my horizontal lines in a very similar way. From the photo that I took from a distance away, the side view, you can see that is semi-transparent here. And that gives me my profile as I'm looking at the car from the side. I also took a photo of the car itself from as far away as I could get and put that in here also. Then laid the grid on top, again using my wheelbase to set the scale. And you can see by the semi-transparent body that's put on top of the rest and the grid, it almost looks like an X-ray of the car when it's finished. Yes, it's pink. As you can see, I've now started to apply the foam board. I bought this 3M polystyrene that I've been able to apply. This car is actually more vertical than it is horizontal, as you can see how the panels are going on. If you remember, I had plywood panels underneath this. That seemed to work out pretty well. And then attached it with contact glue on both the plywood and on the foam board. What tools do you need for this step, and what are my lessons learned? Well, one of the lessons I learned right off the bat was these foam core slabs, if you want to call them, are very light, but they're very, very rigid. So they really don't want to bend much when you glue them on. Now the plywood armature that I put on underneath this was made out of 1/4-inch plywood, and that's actually plenty strong for what I'm doing. The problem with 1/4-inch plywood though is it does flex a little bit, and I got some flex in those panels that I didn't realize that I had. So then when I tried to glue on these foam slabs, they didn't want to bend. So in a couple of places I had a hard time getting the contact cement to actually stick. So that's one lesson learned. Also, the tools you're going to need. So, starting from the left to the right, you can see here that I use a hot knife. This connects to a variable heat control there, but generally I just turn it all the way up. So I've got a hot knife, and then I've got a hot wire too. This just connects into the end of the handle, just like this one does. They're interchangeable. And when I bought this set, I didn't know which tool I was going to use most, so I just bought a set that had this and that in it. I thought I was just going to use this hot wire the most. As it turns out, I didn't use it very much, and the hot knife was the one that I used the most. And it does cut through the materials pretty easily. It's a little slow, but it does work well. When I get in a hurry and I've got a straight line to cut, I find this tool works really well. This is a Japanese pull knife. It is serrated and it cuts on the pull. So it really works well. It's nice and thin, it slides through the foam, and it cuts really, really fast. So after trying all those tools that you can buy at a hardware store, I still wasn't quite satisfied with the results I was getting. And I'd rather not use more than one tool. Just have one tool that I reach for whenever I want to cut a piece of foam. And this is what I ended up with. It's just an old hacksaw blade that I had laying around the garage that I'd made a couple of very similar modifications. So start off as a blade like this. That's just a regular old hacksaw blade. And you can see I just simply took some Gorilla Tape to make a very simple handle, so I won't have to be handling the the sharp portion. And then on this end, if you look a little closer, you can see that I've cut the end off into an angle. And what that does, that allows me to make plunge cuts down into the foam. I can jab it right down into the foam and start making cuts, very tight corners and that sort of thing. So after all of that, this is the tool I use. It makes plunge cuts, it makes very tight circular cuts simply by holding it straight up and down into the foam, perpendicular into the foam, and then cutting it along whatever intricate line you've got. If you want to make a straight cut, you just sort of put a very slight angle down, almost laying it on the foam, and then making long cuts along the foam. And that will give you a very straight cut. And it's a very clean cut as well. So save yourself a lot of time and effort and just make yourself a tool out of an old hacksaw blade. It is the way to go with foam. a tool that's been very helpful in ensuring that the panels are all put on at the proper height. In other words, my ground clearance on this car is 5 3/4. It just so happens that a 2x6 piece of lumber is 5 3/4 wide. So I made this tool out of a 2x6. What I do is I set it in, as you can see, and then that helps me set my panel properly, so when I glue it on, all my panels are consistently at 5 3/4 and they're level. So here are the building blocks, literally, for the plug. Pink foam. And this is a polystyrene. It's called, you can see this, Foamular, made by Owings Corning. You see lots of people use this as they build their plugs. It comes in 4x8 sheets and in different thicknesses, in 2-inch, 1.5, 1, and 1/2 inch widths. I end up using half, 1 inch, and the 2-inch. One of the challenges in working with foam is how you stick them together. I went and I looked at a lot of different forums and reviewed a lot of YouTube videos, and what they came up with most times was this 3M contact spray number 77. So I used that through most of my project, and it worked pretty good. It does eat the foam a little bit, but it does stick it together. And then there is the 90, which is supposed to be really high strength. It didn't seem to be any higher strength, but it did eat the foam more. So I would stay away from 90. Now, using either one of these, the foam went together and it stuck together for, I would say, about 2 or 3 months. Life crept in, and it took a little longer for me than that to get my model done, or my plug done. So after that, and through some temperature changes, this started to let go. And basically my entire plug started to come apart on me. So what was the solution? Gray stuff foam. Nothing holds the foam slabs together than other kinds of foam. So I used this to put the model back together, and use these little tips here to actually punch through the pink foam so I get down between the layers and get some foam in between the layers and get it stuck back together. That method seemed to work pretty good. Now the problem with spray foam is once you get started using it, you more or less have to use the whole can because it'll just clog up on you.